and welcome to ECCN's webcast on access to education for refugees in Lebanon. My name is Cornelia Janke, and I'm the director of ECCN. A few notes about this webcast. This webcast is what we call a partner initiative. It is being brought to you through a collaboration between Jesuit Refugee Services, which is responsible for all the content, and ECCN, which is using its mandate and convening power as an EICC-focused community of practice to share and create knowledge among our members. And our members are primarily USAID staff and partners. Maybe your organization is interested in doing a partner initiative. If so, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about how to apply. So ECCN has 4 priority areas: safe learning environments, improved programming, local institutional capacity development, and improved equity. This webcast is part of the equity priority area, and it was developed through the ECCN Steering Group's Equity Task Team. This year, the Equity Task Team is featuring equity considerations among forcibly displaced populations. For more on this theme in general, check out the recent webcast by Plan International on our website. It focused on gender equity in formal schools in East Africa. Today's webcast features the unique challenges refugees in urban areas face when trying to access education, and it looks at several JRS education programs in Lebanon for Syrian refugees. This topic is timely because just next week a donors conference is being held in Brussels to discuss and determine priorities for educational investments for Syrian refugees, which I'm sure our presenters will be speaking to. And now I'd like to welcome our speakers. So first we have Roy Gabriel. He's the Regional Education Officer for the Jesuit Refugee Service in the Middle East. Roy started working with JRS in 2014 as a peace education teacher and school administrator in Beirut, before joining the JRS Lebanon Country Office in 2015 and the JRS Middle East Regional Office in 2016. Julia McPherson is the Director of Advocacy and Operations at Jesuit Refugee Service USA. She oversees JRS's policy and advocacy portfolio in the U.S. with a focus on education in emergencies and protected crises. She leads a community engagement program to educate and mobilize advocates, and she oversees JRS USA's institutional operations. Before joining JRS in 2015, Julia was working for 11 years, most recently as Director of Citizen Advocacy. So after presentations from Roy and Julia, we'll open it up to questions. And as Amy noted, please pose any questions via the chat function in the WebEx, and we will take those in turn. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Cornelia. Hello, everyone. First, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity that you gave me to share what we are breathing here in Lebanon in terms of education of refugees. My relatively short and hopefully not very boring presentation will be divided into 4 main sections or parts. In the first part, we will talk about the education programs available for refugee children in Lebanon, and then I will talk about the evolution of JRS programs in Lebanon since 2012. And then I will talk a bit about lessons learned, and at the end, I will talk about some characteristics of the JRS education programs in Lebanon. So, if I were a refugee child in Lebanon today, the best education program, to choose the best education program for me will depend on 2 factors or elements. The first one is my age. The second one is my educational background. If I were between 3 to 5 years old, the best program for me would be the community-based early childhood education. It has 3 levels. It's a non-formal program. It was developed by the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, and it's implemented by local and international NGOs. As I said, it has 3 levels. First level for 3-year-old children, level 2 for 4-year-old children, and level 3 for 5-year-old children. The objective of this program is to prepare children to basic education to grade 1, and this is very important because children are expected to know the alphabet, to speak the language that we use in our schools in Lebanon. It's either French or English. It depends on the school we are attending. So this is a big struggle if children, they did not do this community-based early childhood education. This program, as I said, is a non-formal program developed by the Ministry of Education. If NGOs would like to implement it, they need to apply, and then they get the approval from the ministry. They get a training for one of their education staff. This person will take the whole package, of course, and will train his or her colleagues. This program is for each level it's 200 hours, and it covers language arts. It covers also cognitive, so math and science, social, emotional, psychomotor, and artistic domains. So this is the first program for the youngest refugee children in Lebanon. So if I came to Lebanon and I was in school in Syria and I did not miss more than 2 years of school, I can join the formal education program, the second shift. So the first shift, which is in the morning, is for Lebanese. We have some Syrians, but a minority. And then in the second shift is mostly for refugee children. One of the challenges, if I'm talking about formal education, is the language of instruction, as I mentioned, for the first program. So in Syria, the language of instruction is Arabic, whereas in Lebanon, it's either English or French. So it's very challenging for children. One of the challenges also is the bullying that we hear about between Lebanese children who are leaving the morning shift and the Syrian children who are arriving to the school for their second shift. I will go more into details when I talk about our programs. If I were a child and I were between 7 and 17 years old and I missed school for more than 2 years, the best program for me would be the Accelerated Learning Program. It's a non-formal program also. It was developed by the Ministry of Education 3 years ago. It's implemented in public schools in the second shift also, in some public schools in the second shift. Each level, so it has nine levels. Each level is for 3 months, around 3 months. It prepares children for the formal education program. So this is very important. It's regulated by the Ministry of Education, as I said, and NGOs are not allowed to implement it. It's only implemented in public schools and regulated by the Ministry of Education. So at the end of each session, there is a test. The children do a test, and according to the results, they go to the higher level or they move to formal education. And they keep doing ALP till they get to a level that is appropriate to their age. So when they get closer, they can move to formal education and they continue their education. For children who are a bit old and who have never been to school, the best program is not formal education, of course, for all the challenges that I mentioned. It's not ALP, because ALP is for children who are out of school for a maximum of 2 years. It's the basic literacy and numeracy. There are two programs, one which is the basic one for children between 6 and 14 years old, and one for the youth, so above 15 years old. The objective of this program is it's implemented by NGOs, and the objective is to prepare children to technical or vocational or to ALP and then to formal education. So this is basic literacy and numeracy. One of the most important programs, education programs for children, is the remedial and homework support. And this is something we are doing, and I will talk a lot about it in a few minutes. Why this is important? Because children who are enrolled in formal education, they have challenges, as I mentioned. The biggest challenge is the language, and second, the homework support. They cannot get the support at home, and because their parents, they cannot support them for multiple reasons. Second, their life at home is a bit challenging because, as you know, the living conditions are very poor. And a lot of families, they live together in small apartments. So it's not a very healthy environment, and it's not easy for them to do their homework, etc. So this is a very important program. And there are a lot of centers operating this remedial and homework support. The last one is vocational programs, vocational and technical. It's happening in Lebanon, but I think this is one of the biggest needs that we have now, and we need to put more attention, to give more attention to this kind of programs. A lot of people are struggling in formal education because they should not be there for multiple reasons. They cannot enroll in accelerated learning program. They are not interested anymore, maybe. So the best thing is to develop this program, which are being implemented now and offered, but on a very small scale. I think this is something we need to look more into for the future. So this is in general what are the opportunities that refugee children have in Lebanon, and I think this is a bit comprehensive. It covers a bit everything. So if we move to the next slide, I will talk a bit about the evolution of GIS programs in Lebanon. As I mentioned, we started in Lebanon in 2012, offering 3 programs. The first one is home visits. This is very important because this is the essential in GIS mission. What we do is accompaniment, and this is a great space, home visits, like visiting the families, etc., to create the space of accompaniment, to be with the people we serve, to create a space in which they can share what they're going through, in which they can get the support they need. Home visits is also important because we do some programs of food basket also for the most vulnerable families. And this is a good way, also home visits, to do needs assessment, to get feedback from the people you are working with, and then to spread information about formal programs and public schools, let's say, if there are some deadlines, the back-to-school campaign, etc. We make sure through the home visits to inform the parents and to encourage them and to talk about the importance of education. The second program is early childhood education. We are still doing this now. It's non-formal, of course. It's not the formal one. And then the accelerated learning programs. The objective of these 2 programs that we started in 2012 in 3 different locations in Lebanon was to prepare children to go to public schools. So the sessions were relatively short, and we were doing our best at the end of each session to refer them to public school, but this was not very easy for a lot of reasons. So the accelerated learning program was, we were using the Lebanese, of course, curriculum. We were doing arts, sports, music, peace education, and of course, like English or French, Arabic, math. So these were our programs a couple of years ago. But then there was a change, something changed. And this change was happened after the Ministry of Education in 2013-14 put a lot of effort on the education of refugees. So a lot of public schools were opening a second shift. So we had a lot of spots in public schools and space for our children. And NGOs were not allowed anymore to do ALT because at that time the ministry also developed an ALT, a non-formal program that had children, as I said, to join the formal education program. So this was very challenging for us as an NGO because we are not here to compete, of course. We are here to fill a gap. So we're asking all our children, their parents, of course, to go and enroll in public schools. They went, but they came back. They were not very happy with. They were not very happy with the program and the way they were approached. So this was very challenging for us because they were coming back to us, but at the same time we are not competing, as I said. So we stopped our programs for some time, and we closed one project because there was some public schools in that area. And in other projects, we closed completely. And we told the parents, you go there, you join, because this is a certified program, and you need certificates. Your children need certificates. And we are here to support. And this is how we got the intuition that we need to keep doing early childhood education for the reasons I mentioned, that we need to prepare children to go to grade 1. because children are struggling and they are discouraged, and sometimes they drop out because of this, and all their schooling will be affected. So it was good to keep doing early child education, and this is what we are doing now. And then moving from accelerated learning program, which was not regulated by the ministry, as I said before, to learning support. We are doing this in Beirut, and this is where we have like some public schools. So children are able to enroll in a public school in a formal program, but they need more support. Learning support for us means language. So it's either English or French, for the reasons I mentioned, the homework and psychosocial support. So we are doing this in one project, and early childhood education, as I mentioned, home visits also. We are still doing this for all the benefits that I mentioned earlier. We have a youth club which is targeting children who are enrolled in public school, but they need awareness, a lot of awareness on multiple topics. So you know their age, the questions that they have. So this program is run by social worker who has a background in education, and it's a very successful program. Some of them, they are not enrolled in public schools. They are a bit old, and as I said, there is more need to like vocational and technical, and they missed a lot of years of school, so it's not easy for them to join now, even the basic literacy and numeracy. Social centers, these are centers that we are running in all our projects. The intuition was we are working a lot with children, but to make an impact, we need to complement what we are doing in the school at home. You know, so we work a lot with the children, but then we have to have the support of the parents. So we have social centers where we work mainly with women, basic literacy, so they can help and support their children in their homework, etc. Life skills and some vocational training also, and counseling, of course. Counseling private, it could be private, like individual, personal, and then or group counseling. And this is one of our most successful programs because you can see the impact not only on the women and some men that we are serving, but also their families, the children, and so on. And then we have the formal education programs that we are running in partnership with local institutions in areas where access to public school is not easy. It's, I can say, impossible because of the distance or the limited capacities in public schools. So we support local institutions who are running formal programs, and we are doing this in two different projects. And the last project we are running now is mental health and psychosocial support. It's the head of this project is a psychologist who works across Lebanon with all the projects. This person gets referrals from all the social workers and all the centers and schools. And if needed, she does, of course, counseling. And if needed, we refer people to the psychiatry department of a private hospital here in Beirut. And also, this is one of our very important programs. One thing that I did not mention, learning support, which is language, homework, and psychosocial support, has one condition. Children have to be enrolled in a public school, and we are very clear with this. So we tell the children and their parents, if you drop out, you will drop out from our program. So this is a way to encourage and to make them understand that you are not here. What you are doing, learning support, is not it's not the program that they should be doing, but the formal one. We are here only to support, and this is important for their retention. Lessons learned. So I will go to them in brief because I will talk about them when I will discuss the main characteristics of GRS education programs. There's need for continuous training and assessment of teachers' performance. This is very important for the quality because having access to education is important, but if the quality is very poor, this might be having a very negative impact on the children. So this is important, and teachers need a lot of training. All teachers need a lot of training, and now we are working with refugees, so they need more training to be able to interact with these children who might have a lot of trauma and a lot of psychosocial issues, which is very common among refugees. Psychosocial support reduces disruptions caused by behavioral issues. Third point, as you can see, is some children have psychosocial needs that cannot be met by a social worker alone and require specialized support. I'm talking about a psychologist, psychiatrist, speech therapist. A lot of people who have autism, they are attending schools, not ours. They are attending schools and they cannot deal with them. It's not easy at all. So we should not look like we have an education program. It's good. Yes, it is good, but we need to go a bit further. School feeding programs help improve children's attention and performance. This is also very, very important. Children who don't eat at home, they cannot be performing well. They cannot be following the lesson at school. And this is something we know theoretically, and this is something we experience. This is why we are going in this direction. I will talk about it later. Hygiene support for issues such as lice and scabies helps improve student attendance. Also, this is very, very obvious, I would say, and very important. Many children lack the essential clothing and supplies needed to attend school. This is particularly present in the Bekaa Valley, where children they live in informal settlements. So their conditions are very, very humble. Parents often need encouragement and additional information to enroll their children in the public system. It's important to make them understand the importance of education, so they enroll their children. But then, when they face the first obstacle, we need to be there to encourage them and to try to figure out with them how to overcome this obstacle. And this is one of the reasons why we had this intuition to do social centers. And then parents' involvement is important for students' retention in education programs and for psychosocial counseling. Some of the issues are related to parents, so we need to work a lot with the parents. I'm not talking only about the meetings between teachers and parents. This is something we are doing, but more like counseling and involving parents in the accompaniment of children who have like psychosocial issues. Homework assistance, tutoring, and remedial language also, as I mentioned earlier. And discrimination and mistreatment are serious also, as I mentioned. You know, the history between Lebanon and Syria is not very bright, I would say. So we have a lot of like ideas, you know, like perception is not very of each other, is not very clean, I would say. So people are facing a lot of these things. So it's important to take this into consideration. So our education program, I still have, I think, 1 or 2 minutes. I will go fast. So strong link between education and psychosocial support. This is very, very important. Everyone needs to know what he or she is doing to support the children. We have in each school, in each education center, we have a social worker who works closely with the children, counseling, group counseling activities, works with the teachers on supporting children on the best ways of dealing with some children, of course, trains teacher and work with the coordinator or the school principal on the planning of the whole school year. So this is really important. And if there is a need, the children will be referred to as the psychologist or the project director of the mental health project. And if there is a need, they will be referred to psychiatrists, as I mentioned. Referrals, this is the second point. I will not repeat it. School meals and snacks programs. We provide daily meals, so a sandwich, a cheese sandwich with a cucumber and a banana, let's say, because without this, children will not be able to focus and to learn in the school. Back to school and hygiene kits. This is also very important. We provide them in all our schools and education centers. Transportation, this is key, this is important. People who live in Europe maybe or in the States, they might find it a bit strange that this might be an obstacle, but the public transportation in Lebanon is very weak, especially in some areas in the Bekaa or in the north. So if we do not provide transportation, they will drop out. This is very important, and we are doing this in some locations. A continuous assessment of the performance of teachers, facilitators. So we have 3 teacher performance assessments, so 3 formal observations for each teacher and a support process. coaching by the education officer and the school principal or coordinator. It happens three times, as I said. And we have regular trainings. This is the second point. Next point, for teachers on classroom management, on all the pedagogical part, and we are using the JRS internationally developed teacher formation program. We have trainings for social workers, coordinators, and project directors. We have a partnership with the Jesuit University in Beirut, so we are training also these people, the coordinators. And we have 2 trainings per year, academic year, on child protection, our child protection policy and procedures for reporting. So the important thing about training is that training cannot be seen as a separate entity. A training should be part of a longer process of support, of development. So this is something we should also keep in mind all the time. Parents' involvement, 3 parents meeting per academic year, that's a requirement. This is something we do in all our schools and education centers, even if in non-formal education programs. And also we meet with parents, social workers, and education coordinators or school principals. They meet regularly with the parents if they need to do some awareness sessions or like to talk about their child, how to help their child improve in the school. The last point, I will finish here. Sorry if I'm... so linking education to advocacy, this is very important. To be part of network where we can make the voice of, when we can give voice to the people we are serving. This is very important because there are a lot of struggles, a lot of challenges, discrimination, as I said, sometimes violence, bullying, as I said. All these can be an obstacle for children to continue their education. This, I will stop here. Thank you, and sorry I took I think 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Roy. That was perfect and a perfect transition to this portion of the presentation. So just as Cornelia mentioned, my name is Julia McPherson. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Operations for JRS based in our Washington, D.C. office. And I was actually able to travel to Lebanon this past December to meet with Roy and our colleagues in our Beirut office and to see firsthand some of the programs that Roy has so ably described. So in this portion of the presentation, what I'll do is talk a bit about the role that donors, policymakers, and advocates have played in trying to bridge this gap in access to education for refugees in Lebanon specifically. So just to get us started, as Roy mentioned, there was sort of a shift from the early onset in terms of the initial stages of the Syria crisis when Lebanon began to first see flows of refugees into their country to where we are today in terms of policies as well. So at the very beginning, there were really no specific policies in place for educating refugees when Syrians first began to enter Lebanon in about 2011. But the scope of the problem is really significant. 1 in 6 people living in Lebanon currently is a refugee. So just imagine the struggles in terms of being able to meet all of their needs. And as Roy mentioned, the Lebanese Ministry for Education and Higher Education really have taken positive steps forward in being able to address that challenge, even though there are many challenges that still remain. So in about 2013, this shift began to happen where the Lebanese Ministry of Education launched a new initiative, which is called Reaching All Children with Education, RACE for short. And there have been a couple of iterations of RACE, but the primary goal of the program is to first and foremost improve access but to education with the focus on both Lebanese and refugee school-age children. And when I get to the portion about recommendations, they'll really speak to some of these approaches where it's important to both look at the displaced population when developing these programs and policies, but also look at the host country population to see how programming can be improved to benefit both sets. The second goal is to improve the quality of education, so both access and quality are important. And then, of course, to introduce systems for monitoring and evaluation, which Roy also mentioned. And this is a broader theme in terms of providing access to education in these contexts where oftentimes you're working in the midst of a bit of, a situation that's very fluid, but keeping an eye on the need for constant evaluation and monitoring to be able to track progress and improve your programs. So a bit more about the RACE initiative. As a result of this initiative by the Lebanese government, they were able to open the first of the second shift schools that Roy mentioned in the 2013-14 academic year. Today, the most recent numbers from the government of Lebanon share that there are about 350 second shift schools, and about 221,000, a bit more, refugee children are currently registered due to this program. Yet there's still a gap in terms of the number of refugees in Lebanon that are still out of school. It's 59% figures from UNHCR. There may be some new data that's being put together, but just to give you a sense of there has been significant progress, but the need again is great. 1 in 6 again individuals in Lebanon is a refugee, so the gap is still there. And I also wanted to highlight, Roy mentioned the various programs, the need for vocational programming, absolutely, and just to share that only about 4% of adolescents, so this is secondary school age refugees, are actually enrolled in school. So there's a big gap in terms of access to primary school and secondary school and beyond. To give you a bit of perspective, globally, when you look at the global number of refugees and forcibly displaced persons, the average is that about 23% of secondary school age refugees are enrolled in school. So if you look at this 4% of that secondary school age population in Lebanon, it's significantly lower than even the global average. So there have been some successes, like I mentioned, an increase in overall enrollment from where we started at the beginning of the crisis. This approach to benefit both the host population as well as the displaced population. And this recognition of the program that we mentioned about early childhood education, really recognizing the importance of early childhood education and making an investment in supporting those programs that benefit children before they enroll in the public school system. So those have been some really important successes. But again, some challenges that continue, lack of access in some communities. Roy mentioned lack of access to transportation, just being able to access a school nearby and be able to go to school on a regular basis. There's a disparity in terms of where schools are located based on where refugee populations find themselves. So that's a significant challenge. Again, the enrollment rates for secondary school are very low, and I'll just correlate that a bit to high rates of early marriage and child labor. So there are some numbers in terms of both in Lebanon and in other countries in the region where we're seeing high rates of early marriage and child labor for that age group in particular. And then again, as Roy mentioned, few vocational or skills-based training opportunities, which is a significant issue. Now, in terms of what the global community has been able to do to address some of these challenges, and Cornelia mentioned in her introduction that next week donors will be gathering in Brussels for a conference to support Syria and the region, focused particularly on refugees from Syria. And this is the third iteration of similar conferences that have been held over the past couple of years. Both in 2016 and 2017, donors came together in London and Brussels to discuss how to support Syrian refugees and the countries hosting them. And commitments were made on jobs, on education, on protection for refugees, including a commitment in particular to ensure that all refugee and vulnerable children in host communities would have access to quality education by the end of 2016-2017. This was a specific commitment that was made at the 2016 London conference. But as we've already shared, that very aspirational goal of ensuring that all of these vulnerable populations have access, has not been met. And of course, it's important to have aspirational goals, but we want to also make sure that we revisit these goals and are able to bring to donors' attention that there are still significant gaps. In terms of where we are, based on UNHCR information, only about 25% of the funding they say is required to meet the educational needs of refugees in Lebanon has been received. And if you look at the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in Lebanon, a 2017 November update that they shared, only about 47% of its 2018 work plan has been funded. So we are, making strides with few resources, but need more to accomplish the original goal. So actually earlier this week, we put together a report that is available on the ECCN website that shares a bit more information about our work in Lebanon and some of the recommendations that we make. It also takes a broader look at access to education in emergencies outside of the Lebanon example, and try to connect the dots a bit in terms of what we see as the most critical recommendations that we want to make to donors and policymakers. So some of these recommendations include access to education must be prioritized in all stages of humanitarian response, and this also includes incorporating education in national response plans. So we noted at the beginning that there was really no policy in place at the beginning of the Syria crisis in Lebanon, and this isn't unique to Lebanon, to set the context and to set a plan in place for how to respond to a potential influx of displaced persons in a host community. And education, unfortunately, is often, even if there is a plan in place, is often is not prioritized or is not included. So we really want to make sure that access to education is prioritized in all stages, included in national plans, and remains a priority both at the beginning, at the outset of an emergency, and as that emergency evolves and may turn into a longer, more protracted situation. Efforts must be made to offer equal access to all levels of education. So we make the case for pre-primary through tertiary higher education. So exactly what Roy described, the importance of early childhood, primary, secondary, and looking beyond in terms of vocational training, livelihood-based training. So all of those opportunities need to be provided equally. And we didn't talk a bit about this, but I've seen, I think, a couple questions come in already, so maybe during Q&A we can tackle this in more detail, but really looking at marginalized groups within the student population. So that includes girls, maybe students with special needs. Actually, Roy did talk about special needs and did a great job. But in terms of gender, maybe we can talk a bit more about that. But certainly taking a closer look at the special needs that certain populations present. And this is just a quote from a member of a youth club, a JRS youth club in Beirut, who is a secondary school age young person, a girl in this case, who is not enrolled in school, but she says, I wish I could go to school, but I spend most of the day at home with nothing to do. And unfortunately, the youth club presents her with an opportunity to be with others her age, to be with JRS staff, to have an outlet, to talk about her life and her hopes, but there are few opportunities for her beyond that. Additional recommendations include developing education programs to meet the specific needs of refugees. So not every education program is the same, and not every refugee context is the same. So really being able to tailor programs to meet those specific needs in those specific contexts. Host governments must allow for integration of children into local schools, and this also is applied to refugee teachers, certification for teachers, giving teachers the opportunity to be employed in this setting, and potential access to other employment opportunities. So the link between the labor market, legal status, employment is really critical in terms of providing a comprehensive approach to some of this work. And efforts must really stay on course, regardless of the possibility of repatriation or resettlement. So when I was in Lebanon late last year, there had been calls for repatriation of Syrian refugees back to Syria. And then we've seen in early 2018 so far that the conflict in Syria continues and has spiked in some places. So we really just need to be cognizant of that and make sure that that the safety and security of refugees is first and foremost. And this is just a quote from a colleague of ours inside Syria during some of the violence that we've seen recently outside of Damascus. He said last week a mortar targeted a public school and some of the children have witnessed the death of the friends in the school. And so just really being aware of the realities of the situation on the ground. And finally, so in terms of what's coming up, again, we mentioned this conference next week in Brussels. This will be an important opportunity to highlight the gaps that still remain, ensuring access to education for refugees and to hold donors accountable for previous commitments made. And then I also wanted to briefly mention a UN-led process that will culminate in a new global compact on refugees that will be shared at September's UN General Assembly that takes place annually here in the U.S. And there have been ongoing consultations over the past several months and continuing through the coming weeks to develop this final product. And while non-binding, it's really an opportunity to include specific action points on education to make sure that it's a priority in global response efforts. So these are just a couple of opportunities that 2018 will present to us to continue to place a spotlight on these issues. Thank you. That wraps up my portion, and I think we will pivot to Q&A.
Thank you, Julia and Roy. That was really helpful and interesting background for a lot of us, and I think that we have a lot of interest in the work that you're doing, and have received a number of questions already, and we'll try and get through as many of these as we can with the time that we have. And I'll go ahead and just start with the one at the top of the list, which is what are the main gender-related issues in the education of refugees that you've seen in your Lebanon work?
When we talk about gender-related issues and obstacles to education, we usually think of girls, of course. And this is true because girls are victims sometimes to early marriage, let's say. So at an early age, they stop their education and they go and they get married, which is culturally acceptable in the culture of the refugees we work with. So this is one of the challenges. Second is the culture itself that sometimes consider the education not important for girls because they are not. Girls should not maybe continue their education, go to higher education, and then have jobs. So this is part of the awareness sessions that we work. This is why we work with parents. So working in social centers, doing a lot of awareness sessions through our social workers, teachers, coordinators, is a reaction to this to these things. At the same time, gender is not only girls. So some boys they drop out sometimes from school, formal education or non-formal education, because they have to support their families, their parents. So sometimes their father is not there. It's not for some reason. So they are supporting the family, or their parents are there, but they need to be also working to support them. So when we think about gender, it's not only girls, it's girls and boys. First thing is when you go to Beka, let's say, where we are doing formal education, if we do not provide transportation, it's not very easy to convince people to send their daughters to our school because they have to walk, let's say, and walking is not that easy for a girl in some locations. So this might be also a challenge. I don't know if Julia, if you want to add anything to this.
Right. Just to echo what Roy said, that some of these challenges are certainly challenges present in Lebanon and aren't unique to Lebanon, where in other refugee contexts these are certainly challenges as well. So that I would just add in that piece.
Okay, we have a follow-on question that I think can flow nicely from this one from Shazleen. Asking about whether fathers are engaged in the program or if it's mostly mothers that participate in the meetings and accompany children for counseling, etc. And, just a little bit of an add-on, do you have anything that targets fathers in particular?
Okay, so fathers, they do attend some of the meetings that we do in the school. So we can see like mothers and fathers, and sometimes we invite the father if we need his intervention to support the child if the child has any psychosocial issues. So in the school we work with both, like fathers and mothers. And our social centers mainly is for women mainly. But we have programs for men, counseling, as I said, group sessions, awareness sessions, basic literacy, and life skills also with some vocational training as well. Why it's more difficult to work with fathers, because men, they have to work sometimes. So they are not as much present, and they don't have as much free time as women, as the mothers. That's why we are trying as much as possible to include them, to involve them in the school, of course, and in the social centers that I mentioned.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I see one more question related to gender, so I'm going to go a bit out of order, and this is from Sarah, focused on girls in particular. I think you touched on this. I just wanted to see if you have anything else to add, whether you have any particular programs or specific interventions for girls. You've already touched on this. I don't know if there are any other further thoughts that you'd want to add.
I have nothing to add. It's just that we always make sure that we keep an eye on the numbers, the enrollment, girls and boys, and whenever we find something, we encourage the direction. If there is a problem in the balance, we encourage the administration to make the necessary steps.
Okay, great. Then let's shift to a question from Catherine. At JRS, do you do any activities that bring Lebanese nationals or children together with refugee children? And if you do, if you could share any lessons learned in relation to that.
This is a very important question because of the tension between both communities, as I mentioned earlier. We had a program, a learning support program for Lebanese children in one of our education centers, which is here in Beirut, and it was successful. But my answer would be it will depend also on the location where we are working. In some location where we are offering formal education, we have some Lebanese children in the school, and we work a lot on peace education, we work a lot on communication, on how to perceive the other who is different. This is part of the program that we have. So we develop school projects in parallel to the curriculum, to the formal curriculum, in which we work on these issues. In some other locations where we are working very close to informal settlements, the distance impose some, they are not restrictions, but in these locations, like only refugees live there, and the Lebanese children, they have access to the public schools where they live. In other places, like social centers, adults, we work with both. Like we have some Lebanese also in the basic literacy and the life skills and vocational courses. So we do our best to involve as much as possible the local community. But as I said, it will depend on the nature of the program and the location.
Okay, thank you. This next question is from Dimitri. Can you speak to how JRS works to overcome language barriers for Syrians living and learning in Lebanon? So, for example, do you have then the Lebanese curriculum in French, or what other supports do you provide?
Okay, so Lebanese curriculum, the language of instruction is, as I said, either English or French. For early childhood education, this is something we can use the Lebanese curriculum, of course, as it is, to prepare children to go to basic education. They are still very young. What they are supposed to learn is simple, so we use it as it is. As I said, for older children, we do learning support. For children who are enrolled in public school, and learning support has one component, which is the language, so English or French. In our formal programs, we have also some kind of the remedial that we do during the summer break. So we have a summer program. It's more recreational, it's more fun activities, awareness sessions, but we include also preparation for children, especially in English and in English, because this is the language we adopted in the formal education programs. We prepare them during the summer break for their enrollment starting September each year.
Okay, thank you. We have another question saying that, Roy, you mentioned that you provide psychosocial support for refugee children, but that some needs require specialized support, such as a psychiatrist or a speech therapist. Could this be an avenue to provide support to children with disabilities?
Of course, but it needs more resources, I would say, and it needs a special attention to this kind of program. We are not doing this now, but this is an opportunity that we are considering, because we can see the challenges that these people are facing. If I'm going to give one example, it's more a physical disability. We had one child who is 9 or 10 years old, who was in our ALP, so before the change that we did in our program. And then he went to public school. We referred him to public school, but he was not able to continue because his class is on the 3rd floor. We made our best to change the situation, but it did not happen. So this is one of the challenges we face. Sometimes we feel paralyzed, and especially in some locations where we are not allowed to do formal education, and this is the only program they can enroll in. So this is a challenge. This is something we are looking into because we can see the need. It's very clear.
Okay, and this is a final question that I see here, and it relates to, have you promoted more harmonious relations between host and refugees communities, or how have you dealt with social stigma or disparities between the host and refugee communities where they are interacting with each other? And then, have you found it better when communities are integrated or kept separate for more targeted approaches and services?
Okay, so this also will depend on the location. In some locations, the refugees, they live in informal settlements separately from the local communities. We don't see any tensions between both communities. Then in another project, we work together, as I said, with Lebanese, vulnerable Lebanese children and vulnerable Lebanese families, adults, and Syrian refugee also, refugees. And the third, in another location where when it's completely urban, it's here in Beirut, so they live together like hosts and the refugees, and there are a lot of tensions. We are working a lot with the local community, a lot, and regular meetings. We invite them to a lot of events that we do with the refugees. This is part of what we are doing, and we are promoting now the involvement of the Lebanese more in the social centers. This is a good way to start putting people together and make them talk and So this is something we should work a lot on. It's not easy. It's very critical for a lot of reasons. And one of them is the historical relationship, which is a bit challenging.
Great, thank you. And we have one final question, this one from Chris. How is your relationship with the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, and what is one thing that you'd like to ask them to help to support your programs?
When the Ministry of Education changed, we were doing ALP before, as I said. So when the Ministry of Education started with the new, as Julia mentioned, they opened second shift, and they developed ALP also curriculum in public schools. We had a meeting with the representatives from the PNU, Project Management Unit, from the Ministry of Education, and the recommendation was to get more in contact with the ministry and then switch. So stop doing ALP because the ministry is doing it now, and go to early child education to support the system, the formal system, and doing some learning support. So the relationship, I would say, is good because we are in regular contact through the education working group in both locations where we are working. And we are looking, of course, we are looking more into ways of deepening and strengthening the relationship with the ministry. If I'm going to ask something, it would be more focused on secondary and access to secondary, because in some locations, some public schools, Syrian children on the second shift, they go to grade 6 and grade 7, and there is no grade 8 and 9. So they cannot continue their education and access secondary education. And it's not always possible to move to the morning shift. So I would say to expand, because Julia talked very clearly about the huge need. A lot of children are still out of school, to expand, and then to make sure that the access to secondary education is there, and more support to secondary education and vocational and technical also. And also the training of teachers in public schools, because it was in the plan, and there's a lot of struggles in public schools because of the challenges that they have in the classroom. So they need a lot of training, and this is not happening a lot. The regular visits from the DOPS, which is the monitoring and evaluation arm of the Ministry of Education, is doing regular visits and reporting to the Ministry of Education. But I think we should strengthen, the Ministry should strengthen a bit the support to the schools. One last thing, the Ministry has done a lot of efforts. You know, the system in Lebanon was, I would say, like weak, you know. So the ministry did a lot of effort to strengthen the system, but we need to do more.
Okay, I think that concludes the questions section, and we're almost out of time. So just quickly, a big thanks to Roy and Julia for a very engaging session. And thanks to all of those attending for your interest and for your excellent questions about this timely and challenging topic. I wanted to mention that related to this topic later today, the Foreign Policy Program and the Center on Universal Education at the Brookings Institution are hosting a similar roundtable discussion on education for urban refugee children. It'll focus on topics such as providing access to quality and inclusive education, as well as legal policy and coordination tools to improve educational access for this population. Stay tuned for outcomes from this meeting. Also, if you haven't seen the cool literacy gaming apps that won the Edu App for Syria competition, check those out. They're available on our website. You also might want to check out the rich array of materials from the October 2016 ECCN Urban Refugee Roundtable event held at Georgetown University. This info is also on our website. Finally, or also in the coming months, we'll be releasing some really useful and compelling information related to programming guidance on equity, and also some possible program equity indicators that ECCN has been developing in collaboration with FHI 360's Equity Research Initiative. And last but not least, the recording of this webcast will be available on our website soon. So please make sure to refer your colleagues if you found this interesting and useful. And on that note, I will conclude. Take care, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.